Big noise first came to my attention in your coverage of what was happening in southern Mexico with the Zapatistas, where there was a lot of death squad activity and repression by the government. Does it remind you of that? Does it seem political in that kind of way?
Actually, Mexico is a very good place to draw a comparison, because Mexico also has that sort of facade. I mean, a succession of supposedly democratic governments that put the same dictatorship basically in power for 70 years on the surface, and then outside of camera range, acts of insane violence that are clearly calibrated to intimidate the population to the maximum degree while maintaining a distance from the people watching on the outside.
Well, outside of camera range depends on where the cameras go. You take your cameras to everywhere the action is happening. Sandra, you're on the ground there, presumably seeing journalists from other parts of the world. What do you make of the way this story is being covered? When you talk to your friends, even back home in Canada, I'm sure you get it, that it's a pretty different picture we're getting outside of Honduras from what you're seeing up close.
Yeah, there definitely is, and a lot of the coverage, the international level tends to focus on things sort of at the highest levels of power. So it'll talk about the talks in Costa Rica, or where de facto president and elected president, what they're doing, where they are. It tends to a lot of it tends to downplay a lot of the really serious issues, and as well, it keeps it to, the media's really personalized what's going on between elected President Manuel Zelaya and de facto, coup regime President Micheletti. And that's not the real issue of what's going on. I mean, the major issue behind the coup was the non-binding consultation that was leading up to potential constitutional reforms. And, the massive presence on the streets isn't mostly, political party. It's mostly the entire social movement of Honduras. And, part of the sort of media gap originates in Honduras. The morning of June 28th, there were at least 7 major media outlets in Honduras, where there was military intervention, in some cases really severe beatings, detention, soldiers coming by with M16s and shooting up radio studios, etc. And there's really extremely serious ongoing persecution, including one murder of Honduran journalists and Honduran media outlets who actually continue to cover what's going on the ground. And so, this gap in information or in the reality that's being presented is also, I'd say, even stronger in Honduras itself.
But Bill Clinton right now is on his way to North Korea to intervene, when everyone hopes successfully, on behalf of journalists who've been imprisoned there. Hillary Clinton, meanwhile, the State Department has taken a very peculiar line vis-a-vis Honduras, talking about Zelaya, who attempted to return, as himself being reckless. What do you make of the way the State Department is reacting in this situation? I mean,
it's clearly facing contradictory kind of pressures right now. But I mean, the whole frame that they're putting on this is as if there's two different sides that both have something, part of the truth on their side, not as a president who's been ousted by a military coup, facing, a regime that came to power absolutely illegally.
To get to what Sandra said about it's not about the personalities, there are some policies at stake. What do the social movements in Honduras want?
Well, the thing is that Honduras, we have to have a little bit of historical context here. This coup right now is the toxic legacy of decades of American foreign policy in the region. It was led by generals who were trained in the School of the Americas. Members of the coup regime were part of Battalion 316, the infamous death squad that was formed in Honduras under the leadership of John Negroponte, the American ambassador at the time. Honduras was called the USS Honduras, an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the center of a Central America that was rising up against neoliberalism in global capital at that moment in the 80s. So the movements in Honduras were really decapitated and terrorized at that time. And we're just beginning to reemerge, and the process of calling for a constituent assembly or a participatory nationwide process to reevaluate and change the Constitution was beginning to network what was an unfocused kind of movement around the country. Right now, post-coup, we've had over 30 days of nonstop nationwide struggle, and it's not the kind of demonstrations that the pro-coup people have organized, where they bus in 100,000 people to San Pedro Sula or to Tegucigalpa for one day. It's every day, all over the country. Road cuts. I was in the north, in a town called Guadalupe Carné. I was, in the south along the border. I was in the capital. I mean, everywhere there's uprising, and this is generating a movement that didn't exist there before.
Sandra, what do you think, and what do the people there think is at stake in this struggle right now?
Well, what's at stake, is not that the democracy was, people didn't really feel that they had a huge stake in the democracy in Honduras anyways. But the proposal that was going forward, that was being discussed, June 28th with a non-binding consultation about the potentially fourth ballot box for constitutional reform, that would be leading towards a more participatory democracy. And so that's one thing that's at stake for people is, that's why there's huge, overwhelming support. That's why people are on the streets every day, because elected President Manuel Zelaya did move towards sort of, from center-right to sort of center-left and made some alliances with, different sectors of the population.
We've got about 15 seconds, Rick, just quickly. That footage of the soldiers there, young, scared-looking guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is, actually, this scene is actually interesting. There was a split inside the military at this checkpoint. The first general who was there tried to let us through. Reinforcements came in to block them outside. So rifts inside the military are another possible way this thing is resolved.
Rick, Rowley, Sandra, Cuffe, thank you so much for your reporting. I'd love to have you on sometime, Sandra, to talk about the Dominion, how it works. We'll do that at another date. Meanwhile, keep up the great work in Honduras. And Rick, thanks so much for coming in. You're watching GRITtv.